Hi guys, today I am going to talk to you about not being pagan anymore, or at least the loosening of my relationship to that label and to the practices that I have associated with that label over the years, and the freedom that I am finding and have found over the past 6 months or so in accepting the possibility that I could consider myself to be not pagan. That I could release myself from that label and not necessarily from the community, because I want to say this up front at the very beginning of this video. Even if I never consider myself again to be a pagan, even if I never again work with deities or with the Wheel of the Year as it's normally practiced within paganism, or with magic, or with any of the other many different types of practices that are generally associated with paganism, I will never lose my love and respect for this community and for those practices and for the discourses that happen in these communities. I have always found an immense amount of inspiration amongst these ideas, and that is never going to change. The reality is, though, that I re-embraced the term pagan in what was supposed to be a loose and free and exploratory way way back when I did, and I did so because I was finding a lot of inspiration and meaning in pagan symbolism, and I was starting to see that whatever practice it was that I was developing really had its roots in paganism, in Wicca, in witchcraft, and at the time I really didn't see any reason to not embrace that label, to not consider myself a pagan, and to not move forward with that mindset, within that mindset. And because, like I say, those practices were very inspiring to me. I started out from a point of looking at pagan rituals, Wiccan rituals, circle castings, that kind of thing, the structure of the Wheel of the Year, things that were familiar to me from my teenage years when I did consider myself to be an eclectic Wiccan. And that starting point served me very well. I still absolutely love dipping back into especially Starhawk and many of the classic pagan authors of those first books that I bought when I was a teenager. But looking back on things now, I can see that embracing that label in the way that I did and moving forward, considering myself a pagan, I think actually ended up limiting me, and I ended up digging deeper into certain types of practices and a certain form of spiritual practice than I had necessarily intended to, without exploring at the same time other forms of practice, other ideas about the world, other ways of looking at spirituality. And I don't think I ever really intended on dropping anchor there and digging my heels in quite so much as I feel I actually did over the coming years. I think before I go any further, to give some context to this video and help you understand my train of thought a bit better, I might start by telling you what practices I am no longer partaking in, and why I feel like the release of those practices has led me to a point where it doesn't make sense to me to call myself pagan anymore, or right now at least. And it really is quite simple, because my practices have become extremely pared down over the last few years when my practice was increasingly stagnating and floundering. And essentially the first one is working with deities, which feels like a bit of a potential surprise, because the last video I actually made on my channel before my hiatus, so the second to last video before this one, was about working with deities and how to start working with deities, and how I haven't rewatched it yet, and I will, because I want to remember what it was that I was saying that I might make videos on around that topic, and I'm curious to see where my head was at that time. But I was in one of those short-lived phases of being excited about a new idea. Excited about a new idea of working with deities, of working with pagan symbolism. And it just didn't work. It didn't go anywhere for me. It had no life to it, is the best way that I can describe it. And I finally got to a point some months after making that video where I realized that there was no draw for me anymore to deity work, to deity reverence. And I can still understand the draw of deity from a symbolic or pantheistic perspective. And because, like I say, that really stood to me quite well over the years. And I always have held an agnostic stance when it comes to the nature of deities, the nature of divinity and so on. And that still holds. I was able to often suspend my disbelief in deities as external entities quite often, and I did actually find that to be a powerful way of working with deities, but in complete honesty, that hasn't been the case in a long number of years. Probably since I moved to Edinburgh, which, I mean, I moved back from Edinburgh 3 years ago, so it must be 7 years now since I first moved to Edinburgh and since I had a solid deity practice. So when I look at those span of years now and I see that 10 years ago I started working with deities again, 7 years ago I essentially stopped, or it stopped being powerful to me, I really have to look at myself and ask, you know, why is it that I continue with that, and what does it mean now to finally let go of that? I'm going to get into that more later on, but I do want to just quickly touch on the other aspects of my practice that I'm also letting go of, that I think kept me bound to that pagan term. Actually, there's quite a few. I was going to just say ritual structure as a whole, and this obviously encompasses a lot of different elements. No pun intended, but the elements being one component of that. This is something that has been fluid for me over the years. I have cycled back and forth with using different parts of traditional circle casting and bringing in different classical pagan components, such as the elements, the 4 quarters, circle casting, ancestors, various different takes on deities, on divinity, on god or goddess, and so on. This has changed for me now, and I actually feel that this was the last element to go. I'm still figuring out if any of those components are still going to make it back into something that looks like ritual for me again as I go forward. And I'm still figuring out whether there will be enough of those components to make me feel that I maybe am still a pagan or not. But that has just been something that I felt I needed to let go of completely so that I could start fresh with a clean slate. And then finally, the final component that I have felt has rooted me in paganism, maybe for the longest and with the most certainty, is my work within the Wheel of the Year. That I have continued to celebrate the Sabbaths, the 8 Sabbaths, as they are celebrated pretty much within Wicca or paganism and everything under that umbrella. I feel like the Wheel of the Year is one factor that draws many of us together under that umbrella. The one thing that a lot of us have in common. And for me, for a very long time, I felt that was my bedrock almost of my entire practice. It was something that I never thought that I would let go of, and I haven't. It hasn't gone out completely, but actually the moment that I started to get really excited again about my practice was when I realized that I was having a new idea about how to celebrate the Wheel of the Year. I'm going to go into more detail about that actually in a separate video because I don't want to go off on too long of a tangent. But essentially I just decided, you know what, I haven't been feeling a draw to the cross quarters in a while, and I realized as Lunasa was passing that actually I've always felt the least excited to celebrate the cross quarters. Despite loving the idea of Samhain and Halloween, the fact that that is my birthday gives it a very, very different vibe to any other Sabbath, and that was always in conflict for me. I never really knew quite what to do with that, whether I should be celebrating both my birthday and Samhain separately, or Halloween, and how the 3 things came together. And I just realised that I was just not Lunasa was not the time for me to start coming back to my spirituality, but I was excited at the idea of celebrating the equinox. But essentially, I realised that I wanted to try releasing the cross quarters completely as celebratory days, celebrating only the solstices and the equinoxes in a formal fashion, and instead considering those cross-quarter Sabbath names to be seasonal names. Like I said, I'm going to get into that in more detail in my next video, which I'll probably be posting next week. All of these different components, my connection to a small handful of deities and my experimental work with different deities over the years, my connection to a ritual structure that served me very well over the years, that gave me something to fall back on and to start with when I was trying to decide how to celebrate Sabbaths or how to do something ritualistic, how to mark an event. And then this convoluted but very powerful connection that I've had for a very long time, perhaps all of my life, with the Wheel of the Year. All of this came together for me for a long time into this bedrock of, yes, I'm a pagan and maybe I don't feel like I share the beliefs of most pagans, but I still was pretty firm in my belief that I could take all of this and say, well, at the very least I have a pagan practice. And I definitely toyed at times with calling myself a pantheist with a pagan practice rather than calling myself a pagan, but the pagan was still in there. I still felt this connection to that as my religion. Paganism was the thing that I was doing about my pantheism. I think I've said that before in videos. So it was still an important part of my life, no matter what way I looked at it, no matter how tenuous my connection was with the label of being a pagan. It was still this constant in my life, something that I would keep falling back on. But unfortunately, because I became so attached to it as a part of my identity, it got to a point where once I started to feel less connected to those three different parts of my spirituality, it created not just a spiritual crisis, but a crisis of identity, and a total gradual breakdown of the self. The reality is that apart from perhaps a year or two, age 15, 16, and another year or two around 2013, 14, so when I was 24, 25, I don't really think I've ever been a pagan. And I don't really think that paganism as a practice, as a religion, if you could call it that, has ever really been the right road for me. And it's just it's somewhere that I got stuck, and that ended up being restrictive for me, which seems very counterintuitive because the community is so it's so liberal and so focused on the idea of following your own truth, and that it seems very ironic to be saying that getting caught up in paganism hindered me from exploring other options or from being completely true to myself spiritually or finding a practice that was actually the right one for me. But I suppose this is just part and parcel of the spiritual journey. This is absolutely not something that I have any interest in beating myself up over, and I think we call it a spiritual journey for a reason. I focused on paganism for as long as I did for a reason, because it served me, because it excited me, it inspired me, because I did glean an awful lot from it. It was very empowering for me, and it really helped me to start to explore my spirituality properly as an adult in a way that I hadn't been able to before. It gave me an avenue in, it gave me a structure through which to explore that side of my life, that side of the world, and I'll be eternally grateful for that. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the path that I took, but at the same time I can see that at some point along the line there was too much rigidity in me. There was too much resistance to potentially letting go of the practices that I had developed up until a certain point and actually genuinely trying to start again from the beginning. And part of that, in all honesty, was to do with being part of the pagan community online and considering myself a pagan spokesperson, I suppose, in a way, and the back of my mind, I think, worrying over the idea of, if I'm not a pagan anymore, if I'm not talking about pagan things, who is going to be wanting to listen to me? Who am I speaking to? And that really shouldn't be the least of my worries. When it comes to being on a genuine spiritual path, the last thing that I want is to be worrying over whether or not, is to be allowing my spiritual direction to be dictated, about worrying about whether or not I'm going to lose followers or lose my audience. And that is the absolute antithesis of what I consciously am trying to do, and what my entire purpose in creating content is in the first place. And this is where your conscious motivations and your unconscious fears come into conflict with one another, because consciously and logically, the entire purpose of me being online and sharing this stuff with you is to help other people to also develop a spiritual practice, to develop their spiritual journey. And if I'm not allowing myself to do that for myself, then what's the point? What is it that I have to offer? Sure, to some degree, I can offer academic expertise. I did a PhD essentially in paganism. I did a PhD on the Dark Goddess. I have done a lot of academic research on paganism in general, and specifically focusing on dark goddesses and deity reverence and so on. And sure, I can offer perspectives, I can offer ideas from an academic standpoint that people might find interesting, and maybe that's something that I will continue to do as I go forward, with that separation in mind of, just because I'm talking about this online, just because I'm sharing ideas that I've come across or sharing bits and pieces from my research, doesn't mean that I have to continue to, for example, revere the Dark Goddess or to be a Morrigan devotee. I spent a long time trying to get to the point of being comfortable separating my own spiritual path from the ideas and content that I wanted to produce, to share with others and to share publicly. And I feel a bit as though I've come full circle with that in a way, because I realized finally that for me, talking about spirituality and researching and writing and coming up with ideas and exploring this whole sphere has to be coming for me from a place of personal interest, personal direction. And if I'm not sharing the direction that I'm going in my own spiritual path, the whole thing starts to fall apart a little bit, and I start to lose sight of why it is that I'm sharing what I'm sharing in the first place. And like I say, that's not to say that I might not make videos in the future that don't pertain exactly to something that I'm practicing myself, and maybe there will just be things that I might want to research or think about, or that I'm working with for clients and things like that might inspire bits and pieces of content in the future. But I think the thrust of what it is that I want to be sharing online and writing about and just producing as a creative person who wants to create material, non-fiction material about spirituality, it needs to be coming from that place of personal exploration. So where does that leave me? I'm still not completely sure. I'm still at the very beginning stages of figuring this out. I celebrated the autumn equinox the other day, and that was the first Sabbath that I had celebrated since last Imbolc. And it's been patchy, my Sabbath celebrations were patchy before that as well. So I really am starting from the beginning again in a lot of ways. For some reason, it's always the autumn equinox for me. It's always the autumn equinox when I start on these big journeys of spirituality. This is my third time around starting anew, and really starting from, starting fresh. So I still don't really know what direction I'm going in. What I have done so far, and I think I am just going to make another video about my altar and talking about the components that have remained in my practice, as well as, like I said, a video on the Wheel of the Year and the way that I'm going to be practicing that. Both of those videos will be quite a lot shorter than this one, I think. What I have continued with my altar and with my practice, it probably isn't a million miles from where I was before, but there was something very freeing in completely letting go of the expectation of myself to even do ritual. I don't even think I could describe what I did for the equinox as being a ritual. At the moment, I'm toying with the word observance, which is a word that I used to use back in 2011, 2012, because ritual just doesn't seem to describe what it is that I'm doing these days. I am mostly interested in meditation and visualization and being in that space. And oh, my neighbour's cat has come to say hello. And I am excited to see what kinds of practices might arise in the gaps that I'm opening up around all of that, if that makes sense. Meditation, I think, is going to be a big part of it going forward. And I keep mentioning Buddhism, and that is still, I have still not done enough deep delving into that yet to have anything new to say and anything new to offer. And I certainly don't want to be making videos about a topic that I really don't know too much about, seeming like I know more than I know, if that makes sense. What I might do is make videos about Buddhist ideas from a pantheist perspective or something like that. But that is what the channel is going to be about going forward. I am feeling reasonably comfortable with having a lot of transparency right now about my practice and what I'm doing and what I'm thinking about, because for one reason or another right now, the secrecy that I felt the need to have around a lot of my practices for many years, there doesn't feel to be a huge need for that. Of course, there will be a certain amount of personal insight and musings and experiences and so on that I'm not going to be bringing into the public sphere. But I'm not feeling right now any particular reason to not share the ideas and the symbolism and things like that I've been working with. For the first time in a long time right now, I'm actually also feeling very happy to be quite open and transparent about my practices and the thoughts that I'm having and what I've been doing. Partly because things are still quite bare bones and things haven't deepened yet in the way that they often do when you've been working with a certain spiritual practice for quite some time. But I also have this feeling that over the past number of years, it got to a point where I was actually having to cast away parts of myself in order to show up at the altar and to ritual in the way that I was. I was having to break away from the me that I carried around with myself most of my life, most of the day, and around other people and in most other spheres of my life, and find just one small element of myself and bring that to the altar, bring that to ritual. And that wasn't really working for me. That certainly stopped working for me. I think it came from a place of being used to operating in secrecy, in privacy, and not wanting to share my burgeoning practice with anyone for fear of being ridiculed. But over time, I became more confident and more willing to discuss these things with other people. But I think because I grew used to having these almost two separate lives, I forgot that it is important to feel like my whole authentic self in my spiritual practice, and not as though I have to whittle myself down to one version of myself that isn't really that accurate in order to practice. I'm not sure if that made any sense. I'm gonna leave this video there. I think this one is going to be an especially confusing, rambly one. But I just wanted to sort out my own thoughts, actually, in all honesty, a little bit through making this video, and to bring you up to speed on my relationship with this word pagan, with this label pagan, and to give you an idea of why going forward I won't be using that term, at least for now, to describe myself and what I'm up to spiritually. So thanks a million for watching this. Do like the video and subscribe if you want to see more. Every like that I get on the video really helps boost the channel and show my videos to more people. And it gives me good feedback as well on whether you would want to see more videos like this in the future. And please do let me know your thoughts in the comments as well. I would love to strike up a dialogue. I would love to hear your feedback and just what you make of this entire situation, and if any of this resonates with you and if you've ever experienced anything similar. So thanks a million for watching. I will talk to you again soon.